Larissa.
Don't Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to a special workshop of the San Juan Valley Unified School District Board of Education. Let me start by calling this meeting to order and introducing our board members. We have Trustee Shelley Clark,
Good morning, everybody.
Trustee Laura Pratt,
Good morning.
Board Clerk Suzanne Ordway,
Sorry. Good morning.
I'm sorry, Laura Pratt, Clerk, Suzanne Ordway, Trustee,
Good morning again.
Vice President Rachel Hurd.
Hello, good morning.
Remember your name. And I'm President Ken Mintz. We also have members of our staff with us, including Dr. Moy, our superintendent. We start the meeting by asking everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I start by getting a motion to accept the workshop agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Bratt. Roll call vote. Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd. Aye. Board Member Mintz.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. 4.0 is our board workshop. We're covering two areas this morning. One on resolutions of the board and then board bylaws. And with that, we'll go into 4.1 resolutions.
Sure. Thank you, President Mintz. As you recall, last year, we had a board workshop where we began to discuss the resolutions for the year. And we started to work through our list. And at that point in time, we had two unresolved issues. One, to go back and take a look at additional resolutions that we wanted to develop and create with the board. And then also number two, to take a look at our list for this year and make sure to examine how those fit into the current calendar, and then to also define which resolutions we'd be having each month. So huge thank you to this board who sat with all of us to develop these resolutions over the course of the next couple of weeks. So you have a couple documents in front of you. The first being the draft resolution list. Highlighted in yellow are the additional new 9 resolutions that we have put together. So what I'd like to do and kind of turn it over to the board is to kind of take us through each of those new resolutions that all of you helped us develop. So thank you again. And just make sure there's nothing there that we need to add, tweak, change, and to be able to get the board's feedback on each of those resolutions. And then the final piece will just be to check the day or month that it is observed to make sure you're okay with what's been drafted here, or if there's things you'd like to shift or tweak. We do have one that we want to discuss, the Inclusive Schools Week, and just find a place during the year we think that fits most appropriately. So to begin, our first resolution that was a new addition was National Literacy Month, which would be celebrated in September. And I'm going to go ahead and let you, I know you've all had the opportunity to not only develop these and to read through them, but to go ahead and take you through that one and see if there is anything missing, anything you'd like to add, change. We really tried to make this inclusive of all the work we're doing around literacy, but I will go ahead and let you kind of walk through that and see.
Christine, one quick question. These different resolution areas, are these all national type of dates, or any of them our own made up date?
So what we tried to do, or what we did do, is we took the CDE's website list of resolutions that are recognized and tried to match as closely to what they had. What we did do was, because last year the board had some discussion around combining some topics under one generalized topic. So when we did, we took some of the generalized topic and we tried to capture them within the content of the resolution, but they are topics, overall topics that are supported by our California Department of Education. And we tried to keep those months aligned as closely as possible. Mhm. Yes, it did. So when we go through, and I'm gonna have to, Cindy's read through these with me many times. National Bullying Prevention Week is where we captured that. In addition to, for example, School Safety Month, we captured Red Ribbon within that. So as we go through, I'll try and highlight where we tried to highlight some of those maybe individual resolutions that may have been celebrated in the past on their own.
Yeah, and I had just kind of a note in general about all of the resolutions. So in terms of just consistency, so there are times when it's whereas lower, this is silly, but lower cap the schools, and then it ends with a semicolon and then it goes to the whereas. Other times it's whereas and then capital, and then it ends with a period. Other times it's just kind of all over the place. So just in terms of when we're, kind of finalizing things, just to kind of look at that, and I would love to see, just in my OCD world, to see some consistency.
I would agree. We will make note of that and absolutely do that. All right, so the first one we have up is in support of September's National Literacy Month. One of the things we did make consistent, just to maybe help you a little, Laura, too, we made the resolution at the end, we put comma and then the month. So that is consistent throughout all the resolutions, but absolutely with the other grammatical changes, we'll make note of that.
So kind of related to consistency, this is something I noticed just on the ones I was working on. I'm used to the format from writing a PTA resolution where the whereas is state basically facts that came from research. And then the resolves are the actions on part of the district. And I noticed I remember when we were doing the literacy one, Deb Pettish and I were working on that together, and we were just kind of getting good statements in there with whereases. But then when I was reading through all of them and I saw the Safe Schools one really had facts. And then in addition to celebrating the week, it had some district commitments as additional resolves. And we did the same thing on the inclusive schools one. So I kind of took a second look at the literacy one, and Deb and I talked yesterday afternoon. So I have some proposed changes, which is really just rearranging like that. Okay. And then there's one whereas down at the bottom where some of it's the references to the kids who read at home do better kind of thing. And that is true, but it also can get a little stigmatized about, well, those kids that don't read at home, that's why they don't do well. And so really flipping it so the responsibility is on the school to teach kids how to read, whether they have the home support or not. So we played with that's a motivation for changing up that whereas. So I went back to our draft that was in Google Docs so I could do it with track changing. Would that be easier if I could share that? And
that would be great.
Because I think on this one, and you're all trying to follow me.
Do you want to highlight any of the major points just so I can make sure Cindy and I can capture this?
Right.
That would be helpful.
Yeah. So the first, second, and 1, 2, 6. The first, second, and sixth whereas really are commitments on the part of the district, which I think also really highlight the great work that we're doing, which, in addition to celebrating a month, it's also an opportunity to say, this is what we're committed to. So those get moved down as whereases. We rewrote the last whereas, and I can just read it to you if that's easier. So we changed it to reading at home, or suggested changing it to reading at home with family members contributes to building a strong literacy foundation and lifelong love of reading. And partnership between home and school leads to improved student achievement and more positive attitudes about school and learning. So, that's kind of a general thing about partnership. And then we did a corresponding resolved that says the San Ramon Valley School District encourages its school sites to engage with parents and caregivers about how literacy develops and how they can support it at home, and commits to partnering with parents to enhance opportunities for students to read for exploration, fun, and in support of academic achievement. So we kind of split it up.
Okay.
And then the whereases that are becoming resolved are not changed.
Okay.
So I hope that's okay. Deb seems
Absolutely,
pleased with it because she was struggling with that last whereas also.
absolutely. No, that's perfect. And we'll get that and make those changes.
Any other comments on that? I think those are excellent.
Yeah, just with you, or should I share it with anyone else too? Deb has it, but
All right. Okay, the next resolution we have up is in support of Citizenship Awareness Month for September. And I will go ahead and bring that one forward. I know you've had a chance to take a look at it. This was a newer concept that we had not done before, and I think it was one that a number of you had talked about incorporating. And so within this resolution, we do kind of, again, hit on California high school voter education, Constitution Day. Within that last, now there be it resolved. So I'll let you take a look at that.
there was one thing I noticed when it talks about urging high school students to register. I thought it could be helpful if we added students may now pre-register to vote at 16 or 17 and the registration activates upon their 18th birthday because it's not brand new, but it's a few years old and it really helps plan registration drives to be kind of everyone, not just individually. Hey, are you 18? Can kind of do them in larger scale.
Is there a particular place, trustee Heard, you'd like to add that or adding? Okay, we'll add. it. Okay.
The last
The
whereas
whereas.
has talks about register to vote and stuff.
Anything else on that? Okay. Safe Schools Month.
Yes, thank you. So Safe Schools is up next, and here is where we did incorporate Red Ribbon Week and the bottom resolved.
I feel like I'm totally dominating, but it's okay if I just.
So
jump in.
please do.
In the first, let's see, concerned about the first resolved. The governing board doesn't seem like the right entity to complete and hold drills. So either we act it or somebody else does it, because it's kind of outside our responsibility.
Right. Yeah. Okay, we can reword that in terms of direction versus controlling.
And then in the second resolved, it looked like there was. Never mind, it's fine. As it is. No, it's fine.
And I would just say, I worked with Lon on this one. And I still have just a little bit of concern that we're mixing a couple of different topics here. And just want to make sure that they are able to stand alone in their importance, even though we're trying to cover them both at the same time. Because I don't want to lose Red Ribbon Week as we're talking about, safety issues, for instance. So there's drug type issues and safety type issues, and just want to make sure that, and I'm not sure, we had gone through it a little bit, so that's what we came up with here. But I'm just wondering if there's something else we can do to determine if in fact it works as a single resolution or if it really does need to be two.
One of the things you'll see at the upcoming board meeting in October was this exact conversation we had in our department just around the importance of Red Ribbon Week. So we are actually going to be doing a separate just presentation on that so we can talk about what's happening in our schools, how it's kind of honored and celebrated across all the campuses because it is such an important week. So I think we would want to continue to do that going forward, even though it is included in this resolution. We would highlight that kind of individually on its own.
And if I could add, it's similar to how we're trying to bring forward certain strategic things. Even though we need to, as you just said, President Mins, emphasize the distinction by at least bringing them at the same time, we're organizing, if you will, how we're trying to go forward. So the hybrid, if I can use that term, is we keep a distinction, even if it's done at the same time, under the same umbrella. If that makes
And so
sense.
different actions related to this
Yes.
general priority.
So I would ask, just to kind of, I guess, play the devil's advocate, is there a reason why it can't be two different resolutions? Because I had the same thoughts when I was reading it. It felt like it jumped, like from school safety to addiction prevention, drug prevention, those types of things. And it almost feels like it's there's mental health components of it. There's, there's disease components of it. And then there's also safety and security components of it. And they feel very, very different in a way. I mean, they connect a little bit in the center, but they're still, for my,
We can absolutely separate them into two. We could do that if that's what you.
Yeah, I know we're trying to be more
I know we're
efficient
trying
with
to be-
resolution. And like I said, we worked on it for quite a while, trying to figure out how to.
Right.
They both both issues tie into safety, but like I said, I felt the same thing, that we're going so far down and then all of a sudden it jumps.
And if you're going to end up having awareness activities,
Right.
you're ending up being overloaded, but they're together as opposed to saying we're doing this month and this.
Right.
That may be more clear too, with the distinction of the two instead of.
yeah. And to Ken's point, that it just, that these are both really serious things that are really valuable and important. And so I think they deserve to stand alone.
So would you do safe schools to emphasize the safe environment, and you'd call, what would you call the other one? It's really about safe people, right?
I would want to look at the state exactly how they define it, but I know there is one that similarly aligns. So I can do that and bring that back.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions on this? Comments?
Okay, up next, we have National Bullying Prevention Month. You have that one in front of you. This was just an addition of one. And this is the to Trustee Hurt's point, that in the bottom paragraph, the resolved does include Words Matter Week. Which I know
I'm
was
sorry, I
important.
missed that one. It was,
Yes, so it is part of this one.
So there is a National Bullying Prevention Month of November, and Words Matter is in March.
Yes, I think what we've always said when we've done the presentations, though, is words should matter throughout, the entire year, absolutely. But when it is kind of recognized in two kind of separate areas. Now, we could choose to move it and maybe put everything in March or put everything in November. It's really up to you.
I do wonder if this year we're gonna end up disrupting people's plans because they
Right.
already started planning
I would
Words Matter Week for February.
Absolutely.
We'd still do that as a transition.
And I think this is one, and I think personally, every year, we talk about Words Matter particularly, is one that we bring out. It's not just for now. It's really to focus, but it's really something we need to be aware of and considering all the time.
I wonder if maybe we need a whereas that defines bullying. And ties it to that bullying includes not just physical, but
Well, it
or
does say,
tying into Words Matter.
the second one does say, it includes verbal, physical, relational, cyberbullying. So it does.
But you know how sometimes the word bullying gets kind of overused, like I didn't get invited to the birthday party. I was bullied. There's the repetitive nature aspect of bullying. You don't want to create this that then looks like, oh, it's not on the list, but I know this came up when we were looking at policy about bullying, about talk about it, but how do we define it?
Well, kind of like harassment at one time does not necessarily be defined as harassment. It has to be like you said, a multiple occurrence.
But we still don't encourage being mean even one time, so it's
Right,
kind of.
right, right.
The focus of the resolution is actually bullying. So I don't know if you guys
We
think that
could-
we need it there or if it's.
Maybe to consider if
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
some,
I can-
something else can be added, particularly to that second whereas. That might help to find just. The comments, questions?
Further.
There may be some data points out there that
Yes.
talk about the increased amount of cyberbullying, and particularly amount of young people, and the impacts. Okay, anything else on this one?
Right, up next, we have in support of Substitute Educator Day. So you'll see, this was a resolution that I know had come up in terms of being able to honor all of our employees, but also capturing some of those that we hadn't previously recognized. So this is a resolution to support, in support of our substitutes.
Any questions?
I wondered about the sixth whereas and way it refers to equally demanding and just emphasizing this word equally and equity and all that. I'm wondering if we could say the role of substitute educators is different from that of regular educators, but it is nonetheless demanding, essential and professional, just to kind of thinking of our SRVUSD folks.
Anything else? Moving right along.
All right, so next we have inclusive schools.
School library.
School library, I'm sorry, they had it. Their school library, in support of school library, which is April, and traditionally we have recognized, and our school librarians have come and presented and shared what's kind of happening, and we decided that that would maybe be a nice one to add a resolution to, since they do come and honor the work that is happening across all of our school libraries. Oh, nice.
The only thing I point out is on the resolve statement as April 2022. Questions? Looks good.
Right, then up next, we have in support of Volunteer Appreciation Week. This is a newer resolution, one that we have not done, and obviously we have lots of volunteers that support our school, and I know it was important to our trustees to have this one added, so this is the month of April as well would be celebrated.
Any questions, comments? It's good.
I like how it feels like it's ours too, the way the examples of the kind of things people serve on are, you know, you can tell it's not just a cookie cutter. Task forces.
Right, the next one is in support of Environmental Week, which would also take place. April is a busy month. And we have that one, which is new, celebrating kind of science standards. We incorporated a few things here. John Muir Day, Earth Day. You'll see in a few of the whereas, the next generation science standards.
It looks like those 2 weeks are the same weeks, but they're starting on a different date, ending on a different date. Was that deliberate or should those match?
Those should probably match.
I realize that we have the dates, but that'll, so every year you'll update the dates.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do. We update them all at the first. But I can change those. There's nothing else.
Yeah, I would just say that I do appreciate the way it's written too, that focusing on the environment, it mentions climate change, however, it's not making it a political thing, it's making it a student education issue about our world. And I think that's important too. So I appreciate the way it was written.
Right, and then the last one is just a to be determined one, but it is one that we're bringing forward to have discussion around on in support of inclusive schools week. And so that was one resolution that we just created that kind of would encompass all of our students, and the week to be able to recognize that was the one week we wanted to have some conversation with you around when we think would be the best time of the year to be able to honor and celebrate Inclusive Schools Week.
I have just one or two small things. On the fifth whereas, the comma after design support, I think doesn't belong. Includes design support and services. And then on the two more down, so it'd be the seventh one. I remember we talked about this as a group and when you get into the least restrictive environment, which means participation in general education to the maximum extent possible. That maximum extent possible could be time, schedule, whatever, but the focus I think needs to be on how the student benefits.
Right.
So I'm wondering if we could say to the maximum extent that they benefit or the maximum extent possible that they benefit, just to qualify that, because I know there are some times when folks want their child to be pulled out for specialized instruction and that the inclusive environment isn't always the right place to deliver everything. That makes sense. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't want to be overriding what we did. I think we all had the same idea, but I just wanted to add that one last little layer in there.
And we were thinking ideally to honor this in April, a week in April, but it is kind of up to you if you want to shift that. And I think that was just kind of.
What's the context of April? Like,
Well, Autism Awareness Month was in April, so that was
kind
probably
of
why.
combined a few concepts under one.
Maybe we make it the last week in April.
We could.
Spread them out a little
We
bit. Don't
could.
do
We
three
could.
in 1 month. I mean, 3 in 1 week.
We could do that last week of April.
Is there a particular time that Special Olympics occurs? All year.
Throughout the year. It's
I forgot to look, what's happening in March? I mean, if we've got so many in April.
March, we have 3 right now.
Oh, okay,
Women's
so-
History Month,
All right,
arts,
then 3 and 3.
3 and
No,
4.
5. Isn't it 5?
Linda, do you have
Five,
something you
yes.
can offer from way in the back there?
Okay. Last week.
So with the Safe Schools Month, if we're dividing those into 2, would we probably still keep both in October?
Yes.
So it's 3 in October
Yes.
then?
Yes. Well, yes,
It's amazing how quickly you run through the whole calendar.
I, but that yes, because
That
that
would
week
change.
is celebrated in October as well. So that was good.
Oh, Laura just pointed out there's nothing in January.
Or December.
I seem to remember that when we first started doing Words Matter Week, it like the national day, and I may have this off, but it was something like it was the end of January and we pushed it into February just because it's so hard to pull anything off in January because you've been busy the holidays. Because you have to plan it. It's not like.
Yes, yes. And a lot of times we're out of the schools, talking with people, watching kids in action. So around those times, it's a little bit more challenging. Or January, December months are busy.
The going, I mean, this shows how far back it goes. It was before we did the calendar change. And so January was kind of, had finals in the middle of
Yeah.
it. It doesn't anymore. So
And I would ask, so with the school library month and the volunteer appreciation week, I assume is a set national week, but the school library month, is there a reason why that's April?
Traditionally, the librarians have done it in April, really, so they could kind of capture everything I think that has happened throughout the year. And to really talk about the plan going forward in terms of the next kind of set of goals that they have as librarian. But I'm sure, I don't want to speak for them, but
Yeah.
I know they're flexible.
I think the other,
I would have.
I think it's also an opportunity for librarians to point out the importance of reading over the summer.
Yes.
And that type of thing, and
Yeah.
continuing education.
but we might want to look at inclusive schools being maybe in later January, just because there's nothing in January.
We could move it to January. We can move it to January.
I'm not tied to it. I'm just looking
Yep.
at distribution of stuff and
Linda, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I think it makes sense if it's gonna be in January, be towards the end part, because I know this year, the whole first week of January is still vacation, for instance. Right. So it really does cut that month short.
We can move it to January 23rd.
It's good.
Well, if that is it, then we will bring a revised list with all of these additions to the board at one of the next meetings. Thank you. I appreciate all your help and support.
Good, good. Let me just point out for the record that I did receive speaker cards. However, since this is a Board of Education workshop, there's an opportunity for public comment after the board workshop on item 5.0, not on the individual items. And so speaking on the agenda items will occur at that point in time. So moving on then to item 4.2, which is board bylaws.
So I will start and then Cindy is going to actually carry a good portion of that because in the spirit of shared leadership, she has actually led this. So, and I want to not take away from that particular piece, but Cindy has said she wants to do it from back there. But anyway, even though I mentioned that there was a seat next to me right here. Before we jump into this discussion, I also wanted to just share with you publicly in this workshop. It's connected to our bylaws because as you know, our policies process and our bylaw process are quite similar. And one of the things that we have learned from checking with other districts around us, especially as we're trying to really review each and every policy we have, which is what we're doing right now. Ensure that our language is up to date. Ensure that there's nothing in any of our policies that contradicts what is expected. Because again, without that type of review, things can fall, they're not current if we're not careful. So long story short, we are proposing that we try something related to our policy process, which is a departure from what we've done in the past. In the past, we have always done our policy work in 2 steps. And for anything that's new, we're suggesting that we continue that exact same process, where it's discussion at one meeting and it's action at another. But what we're finding is that you're going to start to see multiple policies a month. And for many, when we do all of the work regarding the red line and what's changed, we'll be very clear if it's the law changed. The California School Boards Association has recommended a certain change for these reasons. And for those that don't change the concept, they just change the words or they update related to the law, we're going to suggest that we actually bring it forward as an action. If you truly need more to go on there, you can always send it back and we'll bring it back again. But what it might allow us to do is move things a little quicker, because what we're finding is that just like we talked about balancing our resolutions, we also would like to balance our policy work. So I'm just checking if that's something that you're willing to try. I don't need, it's not like I need a board approval on it. It's just, we have a practice and we would like to review, or excuse me, propose a different way of doing that practice.
I think it would be appreciated because we read a lot in a month and then you're reading the same thing over again, I think it would streamline it.
Great. So in terms of policy, we will follow this process that I've just described. And if something needs to be adjusted, we'll just, but I just didn't want to do something differently without asking because we've had a practice for quite some time.
It would also be really helpful what you described about what's motivating the change.
Yeah.
That would
And we
really
can be clear about that. If it's something as simple as the law changed in this way, the concepts are not actually that much different, except please look at this one place in red. And that's it. There's nothing else in that entire 10 pages that's different. Obviously, we mark all of that, but if we draw your attention to it, then I think it just helps.
And I think that's the important part, is just make sure the markup reflects the change so that we're not reading through the entire thing and questioning things that really don't.
So that's the first part, and I just wanted to place that because that's not today's bigger conversation. The bigger conversation is specific to continuing to review and strengthen and update our bylaws. So Cindy, to that end, I'm going to turn it over to you because, as I said, you did all of the heavy lifting.
Cindy, maybe we can introduce that we have a guest online.
I will, thank you. So the second part of our workshop today is bylaws, and in your packet, you received 7 bylaws. And those are included because they have changes from CSBA, either for legal reasons or for recommended language changes. We've also noted in those bylaws some highlighted areas in yellow, and we ask that you take a look at those today because those could be changed specific to SRVUSD, not recommended by CSBA, but rather specific to our district. There are also several other bylaws that aren't included in our packet today. And if there are any of those that you would like to discuss, please feel free to bring those forward. Finally, we have Cindy Smith from F3 has joined us virtually. She's here to answer any questions that you might have related to any of the bylaws. But also at the end of our bylaw review, we're going to ask her to review SB 1100 and AB 2449, which will go into effect in January 2023. CSBA has not posted sample language on these 2 updates yet, but we'd like to get an idea from the trustees if they are interested in seeing policy once that is available. So Cindy will explain those more in detail for you and to give you some idea of what's coming down the line in January, because they are some significant changes.
And the only thing I'll add is, just like with the resolutions, this is a discussion in workshop format, so we can get a sense of what you're thinking. We will need to take whatever you're thinking about back so that we can revise and it comes forward in a board meeting for your appropriate time.
And Cindy, can you please just say hello so we can get the audio right?
Hello, it's nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank you. Cindy Fisher.
Okay, so we're going to move through it just as Christine did. The first bylaw in your packet is 9321 related to closed session. Again, as you can see, all of the red language is updating language either based on changes in the law or recommendations from CSBA.
Cindy, right off the top, the second sentence needs to be.
It
Like
should
the
be
board
hold,
shall
should be after shall, and then closed session.
Okay, we were moving too fast. We'll get that fixed for you.
Thank you.
And I think Cindy S took a look at that and caught that the other day too. We'll have Cindy S and Cindy F today. Okay, anything else that you would like to discuss specifically? Any concerns that you have?
Yeah, in the 3rd paragraph, where it says, an open session preceding the closed, so how we start in here. The board shall disclose the items to be discussed. Does that mean the president's actually going to state them, or is just them being on the agenda?
My take on that would be the agenda. I'm going to look to Cindy to have her shake her head.
Typically, they are required to be orally announced at the meeting prior to going into closed. And I'll just also throw out, it's important to have public comment on closed session agenda items prior to going into closed as well.
And that part we do, but I do think, given the nature of the meeting, and the recording of it and all that, we probably should state what it is. If it's that clear that we're supposed to do that.
Great, thank you. We'll make that update.
And maybe we just say disclose orally or something like that, because that's in
Yeah,
practice.
That would be practice.
Thank you for that catch.
And then, in the fourth and fifth paragraphs kind of combined, I was questioning the way it was worded, how the timing works, because we start out here with open, then we go somewhere else for closed, then we come back in. And so the way it was referring to before adjourning, and the board president shall orally summarize the substance of the amendment for those present at the end of closed session. I think it kind of creates in my mind a picture that somebody's standing outside the closed session room. Rather, I think what it means is when we come back here and we disclose about closed session. So maybe instead of adjourning closed session, it's reconvening an open session or something like that. Does that question make sense?
Cindy F. And Cindy S. I'm sorry. We're looking-
I think so. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is meant to address when everybody is seated back in open session, any of the actions taken that are required to be disclosed are disclosed at that time. So if that clarification.
To just rather than talking about at the end of closed session and the closing adjourning, just say when we when the board reconvenes in open session or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Because
that's
I'm just
okay
starting
that
to
change.
think through the things that are
Yes.
changes in practice and which are just writing it down. Okay.
Yeah. I don't have an issue with that. I don't think that's a problem.
So in the sixth paragraph, about the sixth line down, where it starts, if action taken results in one or more substantive amendments, the superintendent or designee shall make the document available the next business day, or when the necessary, I would change that to revisions are completed rather than retype.
Good, yeah.
Thank you.
And is page 20 still the same one? The same bylaw, I think it is. It's in the matters related to students. It was very confusing to me. I went back and read it a couple of times, how it has the accept expulsion part in it, and then it has the expulsion paragraph. I
Yeah.
wondered if it might be clearer if the expulsion paragraph went first. And it looks like it used to be that way. And then the other one, because when you first read it, you're like, oh, expulsion's in open, and really, no, it's that expulsion is tighter closed.
I
Make
agree.
sense.
I had the same issue when I was reading through.
Yeah, I did too. I had to go back and
Okay, help me.
And maybe I'm sorry. so
Matters
page
related to
20.
matters related to students. We
Right.
have 1, 2, which paragraph?
The
Paragraph
first
5.
sentence underneath matters related to students.
Okay.
And maybe it's even after, I mean, you could leave it how it is and say, the second line, any other action against a student except expulsion, and then maybe there's parentheses, see paragraph below or something like that, that just sort of tells you why expulsion is a separate animal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had the same reaction when I read that.
I was like, wait, we're supposed to be announcing expulsions in public? Then I read on and, it's just, of course, you're not supposed to do that. Moving along.
Anything?
I think if I can just add a macro comment that this is why these discussions are important, because even though we appreciate what our CSBA colleagues do on our behalf, it may not actually make sense to us sometimes locally. And as long as we don't change the essence, so that we are actually placing our bylaws outside of the parameters, then it needs to make sense. So there's no confusion for our community. So thank you for your insights and perspectives on that.
Yeah, no, it's very important that it actually matches our practice. Anything else on this first bylaw?
Okay, if you're ready, we'll go on to bylaw 9012, board member electronic communications.
And if I may, you would know from many of our governance workshops that the whole concept of electronic communications has continued to take on a really important emphasis. And so even though you're seeing a lot more information here, it's in an attempt to clarify not just to you, but to our entire community, how clear the parameters are regarding this issue. It also assists because sometimes people may expect things of you that you actually have to be careful of. So there are all of those kind of considerations that we hope this particular bylaw helps.
I think one of the things that it really came into focus for me was the use of our SRVUSD.net email accounts for dealing with school district business. So I know I have a couple of accounts, I'm sure all of you do too, and making sure that when we're doing something for the district, we are doing it on that account. Or as it states here, if something was outside of that, that we're providing a copy, which is cumbersome, so it's better to just use the SRV account.
I'd like to kind of clarify that paragraph because I think it's missing some things. So so first off, there's a misspelling in the third line in that second to last paragraph on page 27, where it starts with "to the extent possible," and that's kind of the paragraph that I think we're there's second line, no, third line, yeah, personal divide instead of device. But then with that, I think that building some clarity. So for example, I understand if someone reaches out to me via my personal email that I CC my SRVUSD in response, and that makes sense. What if they text me? What if they send me a DM on social media? How do I capture that for public record?
Cindy, would you please weigh in for us?
So that this is becoming a more frequent occurrence. I'm dealing with many Public Records Act requests right now where the requests are for specifically asking for emails on personal devices and accounts. So this is an important issue. But in that instance, if you have personal or business of the district being dealt with in those forums, then we can ask you to do searches of your personal devices and accounts in order to make sure we capture any other communications that might have occurred on those systems. I mean, the preference is always to have those communications through the district account because it's that much easier to be able to search for and capture those communications, but sometimes those slip through. So I don't know if this has happened for this district yet, but for other districts, I have sent communications to board members saying we've received this PRA request. In order to be thorough and complete in our response, it requires the board members to perform a search of their personal devices and accounts. And there's sort of a process that we've set up for that. So that is one way to address that.
And if I can add, just from a cabinet perspective, because we find it more cumbersome to actually search the text and to deal with social media, we've actually, as a cabinet, made a decision that we were going to completely limit the use of that medium for any official business by simply saying to whoever's asking, I will be calling, I will be responding by email, what have you, so as to break that chain, so that there really isn't a valid record that has any of our business. We're really being careful about that, because when you're starting to search texts, which is possible, it's a little bit more complicated because we can't easily do that centrally, whereas we can do all the email work centrally. So I'm just offering that not as a bylaw, but that we've stepped away from any mediums that are harder to fulfill our legal requirements around, if that helps.
That helps a lot. And then I think you can, when somebody contacts you, you can say, happy to further this, but I need to do it on this.
And it's just basically being clear about why you need to move this to a different medium. And I think that transparency is also helpful because it explains what our responsibilities are.
So would it make sense in terms of this paragraph to include, so shall be transmitted through a district provided device or account, should we add moved to and then transmitted or something to that extent, just to kind of
But
clarify?
I think maybe what we're getting at, and maybe this is a kind of a crux of the question. Someone reaches out to you via Facebook Messenger and says, hey, have you seen this? And you could say, thank you for this and put it there. The fact that they reached out to you on this, if they may decide, oh, I want to go on the main platform, they can end it by not.
Right.
I guess you'd be asking them for
Cindy,
their email address to reply
So-
or to contact you via your school
I'm
district.
going to ask Cindy Smith a clarification, because I think what the law expects is not that we tell you not to use your personal devices. I think what the law expects is that if there were to be a record request, you must know that you must search your personal devices and you must share those, because we wouldn't have access to them in the same way. That's your legal requirement. You can use your personal device, as I understand it. You can use your text, as I understand it. It's just then you need to take that responsibility, because I gave you the cabinet example more because it's just easier for us to actually implement requirements. But if many of members of my cabinet use their personal phones for something like that, then simply have to fulfill the requirement as well. Cindy Smith, did I capture that properly, or do you need to clarify something I've said?
You did a brilliant job at that. That's exactly right. Because, and we can't control all the things that the members of the public are going to do. So, our preference is that communication comes through the district system, but it's not always going to be that way. And I think just being aware that, as Dr. Malloy shared, that if there are communications happening on personal devices and accounts, there's going to be that extra step needed in order to make sure we capture all of those communications related to district business if there's a request.
Because I can see, Laura, it would help in our seats to say, this is what I do. But I also wonder in some instances when people are reaching out to us via those other methods, if once we said, you need to contact me here, if
It
they would
creates
feel
a
like
barrier.
you just put up a wall that I'm not going to go to and you should shut me out. So then it sort of becomes up to us. We have to, when it gets to a certain point, say, okay, I'm not engaging in this platform anymore. And then we have to remember that it was there if there ever is a search, because we'd have to search our stuff.
Yeah, and I get that. And I guess just going back to kind of this paragraph, then how do we? So when towards the end, I guess the last full sentence, when any such communication is transmitted through a board member's personal device or account. So let's say I get a text and I respond, and that's the best way to correspond with that stakeholder. The board shall copy the communication to a district electronic storage device for easy retrieval. That tells me that I mean, I know shall, maybe I don't quite fully understand that. Is that an absolute, or is that I should if right? So now I'm reading this as a board member and I'm like, okay, how do I do that?
So
Like-
I hear what you're saying. I think what's missing is the piece, and Cindy Smith, you might be able to help us craft this, but the part that's missing is if you're using a device that can't easily be moved over to your account here, like an email, then you just have to take responsibility for searching that device if a records request comes in. So maybe we just need to add a sentence that when Cindy Smith, we can't easily move something to a board device, because for example, we don't provide board district issue cell phones for that, for example. So then we need a sentence that basically says the board member will search on your own. I mean,
Yes.
does that make sense?
That does. I would just make sure we clarify some language to say to the extent that information is requested pursuant to a lawful Public Records Act request or something like that.
So how about if we take that concept back and figure out how to incorporate it so that when you see it again, we've hopefully captured what you're talking about.
So the practice that a board member uses to be able to easily retrieve those things might morph over time too. Doesn't necessarily need to be a bylaw, but it can be sort of just a best practice that we share. Like you take a screenshot and there's a folder that you put them in or something like that.
Yeah, and I have another kind of just scenario as we're working through all this brave new world of electronics. So let's say that in my area, I hold a virtual town hall. should I be doing that through the SD Zoom account and then record it and then upload it someplace? Or I know that's very specific, but I'm just thinking like as we're kind of, doing these more virtual and is there, and I don't know that that fits in here, but those are things that I think we need to maybe think about as we're moving into those worlds.
Once again, we're looking to you, Cindy.
That's
You need that.
an interesting one. I was not aware that what would be the purpose of the town hall? What would be the context that would be happening?
Well, I mean, I think that there might be an opportunity for a board member to, to have an information meeting, to request comments from our constituents about a specific topic or to explain things. And then there's conversation around that. And so, as a singular board member, I'm using that platform to have that outreach and those conversations with stakeholders.
I see.
So kind of mirroring like how you would have an email conversation. Now I'm having a conversation with a group of people in a virtual space about.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And I think that something like that, you would not be meeting as a majority of the board. So the parameters of Brown Act do not come into play. So I think you're pretty much open to how you want to document that meeting. So if you wanted to hold it on the the San Ramon Valley platform and have it recorded, I think that is fine. And if you were to have it without that, I think that's fine as well. Basically, there really isn't any legal parameters that would require you to hold that meeting in a certain way.
So then how is that different from me having an individual email or text with a constituent?
So the difference is, and again, I'm going to try Cindy because I'm learning as well, and then you can confirm. When we talk about the public records requirements, we don't create records for records requests. We search to offer a record. What I hear Cindy saying is, when you're having a virtual meeting with 10 of your constituents, that legally does not require a record to be created. If you do create a record, whether it's on our platform or yours, you would offer that record just as you would your text. So it's in essence, you can have a meeting as a board member. It is not a meeting of the board because it's one of you. It does not need to be recorded unless you wish. If you do record it, in essence, you've created a record and you would submit the record if asked, whether from your own or from.
Means putting it in writing
I'm going to ask.
or making it permanent, right?
Cindy, can you help us? Cindy Smith, can you assist with that?
You are exactly on track. Public Records Act does concern records, primarily writing. Please recall that the Public Records Act was enacted back when we didn't have all these technological advances. So it was not anticipated that we would have a record that would be an audio or a video recording. We have that capability now, and the Public Records Act has kept up with that. So the definition of a record would include an audio or a video recording if it exists. So Dr. Malloy was correct. So if you decide to have that town hall meeting and you decide to document it in some way, that is the record. And if you get a Public Records Act request for that relevant topic, whatever, then that record would be responsive and you would have to produce that. But you're not required to. You don't have to. If you have a town hall meeting, you can have the town hall meeting, and it's not required that it be recorded in any way, whether that's audio, visual, or audio, video, or even like, meeting minutes or something like that.
And recorded by someone else, like let's say that doesn't become my public record, that becomes their public. Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick questions. This is board member electronic communications for board bylaws. Do we have something similar for staff members? In terms of
like an
the
AR or
rule
policy?
requirements, in terms of how electronic communications are handled, how we retain records from staff members, particularly administration, those type of things. How are those things handled?
So for today's meeting, how about, because I can see Cindy's really
yeah,
working hard, why don't we look into exactly what
That's
we've
what I'm
got?
that's what I'm
and then
asking.
let you know.
That's what I'm really asking, is to make sure that we have, for instance, mandatory coverage for our employees about how we handle records, for instance. I think that's as critical, coming from a business environment where everyone is required to maintain records. The other point that I want to make, and again, it's slightly off from this, is making sure that as we have new board members, that they're educated about these kind of requirements, so that doesn't slip that this is just something on the wall, that it's in practice. And everyone's made aware of it.
Thank you. And we do have a new board member process of onboarding them. And as you recall, you developed a board governance manual last year. And I wanted to just remind everyone that once we complete these and that you have approved them formally and taken action, then we'll build them into the board governance manual to make sure that we're consistent. And then that will come back in January when you have your board governance workshop.
So we'll discuss them because
And
obviously
make sure the updates.
they get richer when you talk about them than when you just read them. Related, can I bring one more thing up related to this? I wondered if our practice of when someone emails the whole board and the president replies on behalf of the board was adequately covered in here, or do we need to address it? Maybe it's not a bylaw, maybe it's in that other document. I know we talked about it in the other document, but I just wanted to make sure that what we are doing isn't in conflict of the bylaws, and I wondered about that.
Yes, and Cindy S., what we do, how our board responds to an email to all of them is in the board governance manual. It's not listed in the bylaws. Is that something that you think that we should include in the bylaws, or are we covered with that being in the governance manual?
I think the governance manual is probably adequate. I would want to just take a look at that and once I see the language, make a final determination on that. But I typically don't see that type of process for responding to emails within the board bylaws.
But what we can do is, to Cindy Smith's point, we'll ask Cindy Smith to look at our handbook. If there's anything in the handbook that isn't in the bylaws, Cindy Smith, that you would advise should be, then when we bring it back to the board, we will actually highlight that. Does that work as a way to?
I mean, and that's why it's really helpful that we're clear. I'm responding on behalf of the board. But I guess where I worried it was it maybe getting in conflict with the bylaws is, if they're mostly just saying your message was received, I'm going to share it with the superintendent, then it's innocuous, but it needs to be clear that decisions aren't being made.
Right.
And then the board president is speaking on behalf because we haven't had a public hearing about it.
Right.
I think.
So I think having her check it.
Yeah,
is a
to
good
that
idea.
point, I think that whether it's a governance handbook piece or a bylaw piece, what I heard you say, Rachel, is that how the president responds can't allude to the fact that something happened that didn't. That's the nuance that you're emphasizing. Basically, we're being hospitable. The president is being hospitable on behalf of the board to receive the information, but if action is required, it's only through a board meeting. So we need to be sure, Cindy Fisher and Cindy Smith, that our handbook is absolutely clear on that. And if anything needs to be brought over to bylaw language, that we capture that.
And I'd suggest that, that is our agreed upon practice. And it could change with different board members as well. As you said, the board president is accepting receipt on behalf of the board. But a lot of times it also gets into a clarification of, a response. This is the action we've taken, not this is an action we're going to take.
Right.
However,
Clarifying what had already
exactly,
happened.
but another board member could in fact respond as well with additional information or a different view of what had actually happened. We've worked under a sense of consensus on that. However, if there was a difference, you'd want to be careful to make it a bylaw issue that then creates more disturbance than fixes things.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting it be a bylaw. I just wanted to make sure that what we do wasn't in conflict with what we've written. Bylaws.
So I have a question about this particular paragraph in relationship to the new legislation that went in last year about board members and use of electronics and social media. Is that something that we looked at when we did this, and how much of that would need to be incorporated into this, if any?
Are you looking at the last paragraph?
Yeah, the one that we were just talking about, to the extent possible.
So the language here is recommended language from CSBA, California State Board Association, and law. Are you feeling that it needs to be more expansive?
Well, I don't know that it needs to be. I just think the legislation was much more detailed. Okay. As far as the specific.
Cindy, do you, looking at that last paragraph, do you think that there's something more needed there?
I think actually the language that you might be referring to is a little bit farther above in the bylaw. There is, let's see, some red language right in the middle of the prior page that talks about social media and the prohibition from responding to communications from other board members regarding matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, including using emojis. You can't like or dislike another comment by a board member. So I believe that is the new legislation from the prior year that you are thinking of, and it's been captured in that language that's on the prior page.
And I like that this clarifies that you can like somebody's visit to a school post, or you can like happy anniversary. It's about board matters that you can't comment an emoji on. And that clarity, I think, helped, because when we first started hearing about this, we were like, what? We can't be human with each other?
I would like to clarify that, like best practice and all that stuff. I think in one of the paragraphs, it talks about the social media accounts and things like that, and the public access to, right? And I truly understand, like a Facebook account. If I have a Facebook account for as trustee Susanna Ordway, I have to make that public account. I have to set my privacy, setting has to be public. But what about, my personal account? But I might post, school visits or certain things that has to do with our school district or schools, practices. Do I have to also set the privacy to public?
On your private account?
Yes. 'Cause
well,
I don't know which.
Yeah,
But
I
there was some language in there, and they're saying that for, it has to be public access.
I would recommend not having anything related to your district business on your private account if you wish your private account to remain private.
So
I
not
think
even like, oh, I visited my elementary school. No, okay. Yeah,
Could-
Which
Could you have, like, if I had that personal account and I visited Sycamore Valley and wanted to amplify that, could I, on that specific post, could I make that post public? Because you can do that in Facebook instead of the account public. Is that a solution to that?
Well, I think it depends on whether you have multiple accounts. If you have an account that's your public facing account as your role as the board, I just think it would be better to keep anything related to that, to the district
Right.
business.
It's cleaner.
So, but I think that I have two accounts, but I don't know that anyone else does. And so maybe Shelley, you do now. Yeah. So if you only have that personal account, I guess is the question.
Oh, I see. If you just have the personal account, that's a good question. I mean, I think the goal is to have anything that's district business be public. And maybe part of it is that I'm not exactly technically savvy on the ins and outs of Facebook, but if the posting of a post that is on a private account can be made public, you're probably okay. I just don't know how the private versus public nature of Facebook works. Maybe that's something I can look into
I've
a little bit.
personally been in the moment of this because you go do a school visit, you want to post about it. But my following on my brand new public account is really small. So but you kind of have to commit and start using the public one.
Yeah, and I think that
Kind of followed.
one strategy is that I think is perfectly within the purview of the law is that you create your post on your trustee Facebook post, and then you can share it into your personal account, but it's still public for everyone to see. But then those followers that you have in your personal account can see it as well. So.
Yeah, that sounds, as long as the district business is public, that sounds like it's not problematic at this point. But I will definitely in follow-up look at that law and those provisions more carefully to make sure I'm not missing anything as far as that activity.
Anything else on this particular electronic communication bylaw? Moving on then to organization.
I did want to note the first paragraph is a relatively new law, and we had Cindy take a look at this the other day to make sure we're in compliance, because our first meeting for this year is the following Tuesday after the second Friday, but we are in compliance because it still is within 15 days. So we're good this year. And this policy, we have a couple of options. You'll see the yellow highlighted area.
Just one question on that. So I see the specificity of that. However, the other tie-in doesn't have to be outside of the 30-day certification of the election as well.
Help me with that. Say a little more about that, Ken, and then would you help me?
I thought the county has 30 days to certify the election. So as the election occurs on November 8th, December 8th is like as soon as you'd be able to have your reorganization, because the county may not have certified until that point.
Cindy, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's an interesting timing issue. I mean, I think in this case, the election is November 8th. So I think they might have tried to do it so it wouldn't create a problem, because the election is usually the second Tuesday of November, is that right? And then the timeline related to the organizational meeting kicks in the second Friday in December. So I think any way you slice it as far as where those dates fall, I think you're going to get 30 days between the two. So, and the other part of this, it's confusingly written, and it matches the law. So the education code is confusingly written as well, is that you have to take action to designate the date of your organizational meeting, the meeting prior to that organizational meeting. So there's some nuance there, but I believe basically how that falls, I think there's going to be 30 days between the election date and the organizational meeting, where that's not an issue because you wouldn't have an election that year. I was thinking on of the other years, you can hold your organizational meeting anytime in December before December 20th, but you would not have the election situation. So there wouldn't be that 30-day window.
About, and especially with the 30-day piece, and if it's coming down to the counting, votes, and it got delayed. If you recall, last time we had an election, we waited to do the board assignments to committees to January to give the newly seated board members a chance to have a clue of what committees they might want to be on. According to this, we'd have to do that in December. I'm wondering if we could have the organization meeting, but decide to put off one piece, one part of it, because I think that was helpful. I mean, you guys barely had your
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and I think also though that that we are, we've learned. And so that, you know, hopefully it'll be sustainable, but with each new election that there'll be more of an onboarding. So it won't be that, I mean, because I actually did have to wait those 30 days before it was certified because the election was very close. And then and then I had the CSBA conference, and that was right. I mean, it was, I think December 3rd was when it was confirmed, and that was, you know, around that time, but we kind of, I guess it was assumed. But if it's even closer and it's not, you can't even guesstimate, you know, then that becomes crunchy. But the, I think using those couple of weeks to introduce the
So maybe
committees and
onboard
have,
people.
yeah, onboard folks a little bit more. So then when they get to that organizational meeting in the middle of December, they have a better understanding than, you know, you do coming in cold. Maybe, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think that's a good suggestion and also probably more humane than it being like this cold wall.
And I mean, you know, it's funny because I look back at it and it really, a lot of that was around COVID too. So it's much more different than I think as I'm seeing this election play out and seeing the interaction that's able to happen that what just wasn't happening because of COVID. So.
It's funny though that I think even at the congressional level, there's a question of, you know, incoming new Congress members coming in for indoctrination. And there was some question on some races about who's actually going to be taking the seat even before that. So, okay. Cindy.
Okay, you do have one decision point to make under election of officers. CSBA offers 2 options there.
Can I make a point about the options as well before? So there's option 1 and option 2, and I just want to point out that the language immediately following the line that says option 2 ends here, where it says no board member shall serve more than blank consecutive years in the same office. That language is also optional. The current board bylaw, you have option 2, and there is no language that states the number of consecutive years that can be held. So I just want to point that out as well, that that's not required to state the number of consecutive years.
Thank you, Cindy.
So a question, the way it's clerk / vice president, we actually have a clerk and a vice president. That's okay, right?
Yeah.
So I think it should reflect what we do or what we want to continue
Right.
doing.
Should see option 2.
No, option 1, I think, is what we do, isn't it?
Yeah, just need to clarify
Like a rotation
the
aspect.
rotation.
Yeah.
Right.
And
2
the
separate positions in the rotation.
And the rotation is noted in your governance manual.
And I mean, I've heard about other boards just locally where the election of officers is like a contentious thing. And I just don't think we'd want to go there because part I build the congeniality of it's your turn and we all support you rather than it getting very political.
Well, and I think that, yes, that other boards who, you know, maybe perhaps like one trustee is always like having the president or something. And I think that the way we do it with the rotation, it just kind of, I don't know, makes the implication, but also clear that not one of us has any authority over another. We're a body. I mean, that's where our authority comes from, is all 5 of us.
When I
And
think,
people can't pass 1 year.
oh yeah, you can,
And you
you can pass. I think the other side of that too is that as 5 board members, we are all equal. We've all been elected or represent our constituency. And so even if someone on the board may feel that someone else isn't ready to take one of these positions, it's really not up to them to decide that. The electorate has decided that, so we support that person, and I think having it in writing just clarifies that that's the way that we view it as a rotation.
Yeah. And I think that to your point, it creates a balance and allows kind of, you know, all voices in the community to be heard in a sense, right? And have some power, and it doesn't just kind of weight down one side or one voice when it's, yeah. That maybe is stronger, but that's not really necessarily equitable. So I do now my brain just went off. post-COVID symptoms, I have these. I'm gonna table and get my brain back.
I was just gonna say that one thing that I think we did clarify in the governance document is that when someone new comes onto the board, they're not just replacing the person, but they fit into the rotation as a new board member as well. I don't know that we have to state that here because it is in our governance, but I think that's a good practice.
You're correct, Ken, and so you have it in governance manual. Okay, so option number one.
Yeah. And
With-
then
with
can
the
we, and
corrections.
then clerk and. instead of s-
Yes, thank you. Okay, and everything else is done. All right, moving on. Ready to move on, Ken?
Yeah.
Moving on to board bylaw 9150, student board members. You'll see a lot of red here. So the CSBA has spent quite a bit of time this past year adding to this particular bylaw. And you had gone with something very, very simplistic.
So we didn't do this process of having the student chosen by the district's high schools. We had an interview process and
Correct.
application process. So are we changing?
This is again, just recommendations from CSBA. We
Oh,
do not
okay.
need
I
to
thought
take
this
them out.
was staff's recommendation.
No,
Okay.
no, this is CSBA's sample bylaws that we've added.
So if I can just add, we felt you needed to see what CSBA is suggesting. Cindy Smith, I don't believe that some of those suggestions are enshrined in legislation in terms of how a student board member is appointed, but I'm going to ask you for confirmation or clarification on that.
That's my understanding because this language is all optional per the CSBA policy.
I
So
know the students who are involved in CSBA have been pushing for it to be a requirement, but it hasn't been yet. It hasn't become law yet.
and it is a student leadership group that has differing views on this as well, because some of us have shared specifically with me, for example, that they are concerned about popularity contests.
That's exactly.
Who has
what I
access to
was-
campaign in different ways, who it might exclude, and that was coming from some of our student leaders. So in summary, the CSBA's optional language, it's not required. It doesn't necessarily align with what some, I'm not going to speak for all, but some of our student leaders have shared with us, but it ultimately resides with you if you want to shift anything related to this.
Well, I have a concern when I looked at this, especially part about signatures, at least 500 or 10% and all of that, that it becomes a popularity contest and then it excludes a lot of students who couldn't take this, that might be candidates to be a student board member.
You know, just rereading that section on petition. My sense is that that's talking about petitioning the board to have a.
Yeah, I was thinking we
member,
could strike
not-
that thing because we're already
Yeah, we
doing
already
it.
have it.
So it was kind of confusing when I read it the first time because it sounded like that's like the part of the application process, but I think that's in order to add a student board.
Yeah, that's forcing it.
I think on this one, just to facilitate the discussion, if you appreciate what we're presently doing, because it's newer, and if you want us, because we've always publicly stated that we're going to continue to review our best practices and in order to strengthen the role and how we support and how we choose and all of those things. I mean, you could simply say to us, ensure that there's no language that comes back to us that changes the present practice. You can give us that direction. And then we could, as we promised, continue to bring you insights on how things are going. And frankly, our student board members should lead that, not us. And then if we need to change any of our bylaws later, we can do that. So I just want to say that if you want us to just incorporate those housekeeping pieces that might strengthen our already existing process, or, just let us know that.
So I think it was good this year how we added a student layer. That student layer was the student senate. So my question is, how are the student senators chosen? And I don't really want to be the board dictating to the students, is this process meaningful to you or not? I would be curious if the student senate might be willing to look at this, because I think the process is good. I think we've had two excellent people sitting in that seat, but my question is, what do the students think? Do they feel represented by their representative?
So because we started that conversation about what we can strengthen, I'm going to put a proposal out for you to think about for today. It's not an action item, but when we bring it back to you. The proposal would be, we don't bring anything to you that changes the existing practice. We work with our student leaders throughout this year, including our student senate, to be sure that the student senate is representative, that we have a process on how kids get there that really includes everyone, and we let the kids drive that. We let the student leaders drive that. And then we make a commitment that at the beginning of next school year, if there's, or even maybe prior to when we're choosing the student, so let me shift that, in the spring, if anything emerges that needs to shift this, we can bring back bylaw language. So that's what I'm proposing based upon what I'm hearing from the few who have spoken, but others.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and auditing what's happening from a student perspective, I think would be great. And I do feel like we kind of had this conversation when we were working through bringing a student board member on, in terms of why we were doing the interview process and how the student senate kind of existed. So I think now going to the students to have them audit it would be great.
The only addition that I would add is that there is state law in terms of having the student board member and just making sure that we do align with state law with our practice.
So what I'm hearing is we will bring back to you, there may be some changes based upon best practice or legal language, but we won't have any language that changes the existing practice. That's what is the takeaway. And then we'll do the review piece, and then we'll make changes down the road if necessary.
Yeah, looks like we have consensus.
Okay.
Can I make one quick point in addition to that? And just, because I was looking at the CSBA sample and I went back to the provisions in the ed code, and I would just want to make sure, because what it says is that there may be submitted to the governing board of a school district maintaining one or more high schools a pupil petition requesting the governing board to appoint one or more pupil members to the board pursuant to this section. So it is optional, but what I'm not sure of at this point in time is if the board has student members, that it is now required to follow this process as opposed to some other process. So I would want to clarify that issue as well in the context of the other things that have been mentioned.
Thanks. And if there is anything, Cindy Smith, that you find when we bring it back to the board at a board meeting, we'll incorporate that.
Perfect.
Moving on to meetings and notices.
And I just want to do a quick time check. We're at 10:30. We have three board bylaws to review. We wanted to make sure that if there was anything special that you wanted to bring to the table, and we still want to have Cindy review the new laws. Just
So I have
Checking
one
in.
other thing on the student board member.
yes,
The preferential voting means a formal expression of opinion recorded in minutes and shall be cast prior or before the official vote of the board. We haven't been doing that.
correct. And
So
Well, but
we
she
kind of
votes
do,
If
first.
I can.
We
jump
always
in.
have the student board member first.
I think, and I'm gonna take a little bit of license unless Cindy Smith suggests we can't. We don't want the student board member to feel that disconnected, even though I understand why the law reads it. That's why Cindy Fisher always starts with the student board member. So that's intentional. And then we move around the rest of the dais. And I just think that if we're going to have board members, it's important that we don't inadvertently make them feel like student board members are outside, even though legally they have to be distinct. So I'm kind of asking Cindy Smith if we could just follow our practice of, we start with the student board member, so it's in essence specific, and then we move around to the rest of the five, just so that it doesn't publicly look like an add-on. I'm going to be that blunt, even though the law is very clear that the student board members' vote is different than your vote. Is that fair to say, Cindy Smith?
I think it's a great solution that accomplishes the two goals.
Well, I want to add in on that because the language also says that student board member may make motions. And I know that, as our student, you know, if we're gonna incorporate that, we need her to know that she
Can.
she wants to, and that also actually will narrow like the gap, right, between if just like any one of us, she can make a motion.
I would just question what type of motion a student can make them. If it's a motion on a contract and they're under 18, does that, even though they're not included in the vote itself, bring it forward, does that have any implications for us as a district and legal? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
We'll be sure that anything that makes it into this bylaw that reflects past practice or must be changed due to legislation, that our board member has some training on what that means and how they can fulfill it. But we'll take that big piece on.
Thank you. Anything else on the student board member? Okay, Cindy, moving on to meetings and notices.
Meetings and notices. So you will note that in the first 5 or 6 pages, there are very few changes, primarily have to do with communication. But the one area that we would like you to take a look at is under regular meetings, and look at what our policy or bylaw currently states. And we do have some recommended language for you, so I'd like to share that. Our recommendation is the board will meet a minimum of once per month. Regular meetings shall be held at such time at the location of 699 Old Orchard Drive. The board meeting schedule will be reviewed annually, and decisions regarding meeting dates will be finalized at that time. So that would allow you to do what you currently do, which is to review the board meeting schedule each December and put that in place for the coming year. And also commit to meeting once per month.
The additional piece that Cindy Smith helped us with is we do actually need to place in our bylaws the time so that people understand it, and then the location. So that's where we, even though some have shared that the meeting times have changed over the years, and our bylaws didn't keep up with it, but our actual present bylaws say we start at 6 o'clock, which we don't do.
Which is so funny
I
because
know.
it
Yeah,
was
but-
7:30
Yeah,
for years.
7:30.
and
So
became
it may
7.
have been a typo, but the only thing that is important before we bring this back is that we have to land, according to Cindy Smith's recommendation, on a time. Whether you want to keep it at 7, whether you want to move it in any way, we don't need the decision right now, but do you want us to leave it as X before the board meeting so you can think about it and just discuss it there? Or do you want to just offer some thoughts? Again, there's no decision regarding how you want us to bring this back to you in terms of that X.
I think we should bring it back with current practice, and then if we want to change it, we could discuss changing it. And we had talked about waiting until after this election to entertain making it earlier. So for that reason, I think we should put it in with what it currently is.
It makes sense to me that that would be part of the reorganization meeting in terms of this is our meeting plan for the year. This is when we plan to start our meetings. But I would suspect that it also provides us the opportunity, and since it would be in our bylaws, by vote of the board for something to change.
Yeah.
For instance, I know it's a common practice at the city council, at least locally, that they will take an action to cancel their August meeting, for instance. So they have a meeting on schedule. However, every year it seems they cancel that meeting, but they do it by action.
Yeah, and I think, and I worry that with while our meetings go super late, that 7 o'clock does build in the time for the closed session. And in terms of ensuring that the board is inclusive and allowing those that work until 5, that they're able to actually come in time. And then I know that there's also that balance of staff and all of those things. So I think that it does demand a vote and an inclusion of all board members. So.
Fantastic, thank you. And then the last 2 pages of this board bylaw were put into place due to the pandemic. So great to have this language here. Let's hope we don't have to visit that again. Okay, does anyone have any other thoughts on this particular part? Thoughts, concerns, updates?
It just Oh, it had to do with, what was just raised in terms of, meetings ending at 10 o'clock.
Right.
And is that in here? I'm just.
Yeah,
thought I made
It
a
is
note.
extended one time.
Yeah, extended one time, but it also in here indicated that was majority vote. We've had it as a unanimous vote, that everyone had to agree if we were going to extend the meeting or not. And I'm trying to find. I think it's later.
I think it might be in meeting conduct.
Oh, I think you might be right.
Yes, it's in 9323 meeting conduct.
Okay, we'll get to that then.
Okay, are we good to move on from this one? Great, thank you.
Good.
The next is 9322, agenda meeting materials.
So in paragraph 6 of the first section, it's just a typo, but it says the agenda shall include the four just.
Thing in there's a change that needs to happen in the paragraph before each meeting agenda for a regular meeting shall list. It's got agenda on the other side. It kind of is awkward.
Okay, no problem. We can clean that up too.
And then on the second paragraph, it's got plural agendas and it should be just each agenda shall state.
There's a
One
tiny
before that
little
shall
line,
should
but
be
you can
like
hardly see it.
Regular meeting agenda shall list.
Happy to make all those little.
Then in agenda preparation, the part about a board member or someone from the public asking for an agenda item implies that it will go on the next agenda unless it's not timely enough. And I think that is not what we want and not what we're currently. So I mean, I think it needs to get in that idea, the board president and the superintendent will either request and determine if it should be placed on the next meeting agenda or a future one, considering if it is a topic already planned for another month's, the stuff that we've already, can't remember where we wrote it down. Was it in policy?
Well,
Policy
it's-
doc where we wrote it?
Yeah, I think it was in the policy, but it's also the next paragraph really says that.
No, but it doesn't really,
says
because
board.
it's still applying the timing.
No, I know. I'm saying though, the next paragraph really says what we wanted to say as opposed to 1 week.
Yeah, except this just gets into open, closed. And whether it's something in the jurisdiction, like subject to a vote. I mean, I really think that that concept that we discussed earlier about how staff has certain topics mapped out for the whole year, and do we talk about this now, or do we wait for when it was planned in February and, or when the logical report happens, or those kind of things. Because that one really gets at community expectations, I think it's important for it to not just be in the policy, but.
And maybe then that the timing aspect of it does go in that second paragraph where it talks about all the parameters of the request in terms of. I don't know,
But I mean, the way the current thing is written, it's like, you're on the agenda unless you miss providing materials, and that's like, no, that's not what we want to.
Cindy, can you speak to this one, in terms of how the Brown Act plays into this particular item and what leeway the trustees do have to place on agenda or not?
So the Brown Act doesn't speak to this issue. This is an issue that's within the jurisdiction and discretion of the board members as to whether an item that a member of the public raises is something that the board wants to move forward with and discuss or, put on a future agenda. So that is not a requirement that the Brown Act doesn't require that if a member of the public says, I want this item heard, that it must be placed on the agenda. So that's within the discretion of the board. So the language that is being talked about is appropriate, particularly if that is what the practice of the district is at this time.
At the concept of, I think it needs to be clear that when that decision is made, it's communicated to the master.
Right.
So they're not left hanging.
And we did work with F3 to create some standard responses, and that I have. So when a member of the community does ask for an agenda item, once it is approved, we do have a standard response.
And we will, before it comes back, have another conversation with Cindy Smith and Navita Brown at F3. Because the one place where historically we were given some advice is, yes, it needs to be within our jurisdiction. Yes, we have a strategic plan regarding when we bring certain information forward. But Cindy Smith, this is something you can connect with Namita on. She felt that if our strategic report was too far away from when the requester was asking us for a discussion, there's another strategy that can be used where that requester could come to a board meeting. It could be agendized, but it doesn't necessarily have to get fully dealt with. So that's a choreography, if I can use that term, that we'll take back, be sure that we have the exact language. And then when it comes back to the board meeting, if we need to clarify any of that, we will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you had talked about that, say it was, we have a planned report on that in
Right.
March. The person could still come and say, but I want to talk about this in May.
Right.
Then staff's response could be to the whole community. We're going to talk
Right.
about
So
this.
there was a very effective step, I think,
Yeah.
that we were given so that we can still remain strategic, but not silence the community member as long as what they're requesting truly is within our jurisdiction. Now, we've been given requests that are outside our jurisdiction, and that's where they can, argue that, but that's a different issue. This is where it's clearly in our or your jurisdiction, and we were planning to talk about it in February, and it's August. That's where there's a disconnect that Namita Brown in particular shared. You've got to be careful about
Especially
the
about being
message
responsive.
that it's sending. So
I think we also, though, provide through Brown Act, an opportunity for public to speak during our meetings on non-agendized items. And that brings an item forward that, it's our responsibility as a district to respond to. So the response could be put this on a future agenda or a clarification because it's more of a question, that type of a thing.
And it can also maybe help so that the person doesn't just come to every board meeting and bring it up in non-agenda items. You're actually giving them an agenda item where they can say it, and then our response can be, you are heard, this is what we're going to talk about it. And it hopefully can
But it
end it until.
it doesn't stop them from
No.
continuing to.
But at least the rest of the community sees us as being responsive. Cindy, when you do those communications, even if something is denied, you're explaining why, right? Okay.
I'm just wondering if, given this conversation, we could drop everything at the, from the added at least 1 week before, through the rest of that paragraph. And it jumps right to the next paragraph. That kind of clarifies the practice. So there's not the sense of commitment.
Right, I just would like it to reflect this concept of the strategic nature of reports. Not just in the jurisdiction or not, but
Right, that there's also, well,
And maybe that is then in that next paragraph, we just kind of have insert something about the timing as well. I don't know what that statement looks like, but.
Oops, we'll work with F3 to bring back a proposal too.
Can I just quickly clarify? I found some provisions that I just want to make clear about the Brown Act provisions, which is that the Brown Act does require members of the public to request that matters directly related to district business be placed on the agenda. However, the board has discretion to determine whether the proposed agenda item is directly related to district business. Additionally, the board may decide within reason when and how the agenda item will be heard at a future meeting.
And thank you, Cindy
Yeah.
Smith, because that the within reason phrase is the one that invited us to focus our efforts a little bit differently. So
We can incorporate that here.
Okay, the last policy that we had in your packet was bylaw, I keep saying policy, my apologies, 9323 meeting conduct. And this is where the 10 PM is.
Does anyone have a problem with us continuing our current practice at 10 o'clock of taking a stop, making a motion? But also the need for possibly adding additional time. Otherwise, we're gonna fall into the practice of saying at 10 o'clock, okay, we'll go to midnight. Don't want to do that either. So maybe stating current practice as our bylaw. Does that fit for everyone?
Yeah.
How about the notion of it being unanimous as opposed to majority? See, what I would want to make sure is that by saying majority, we're not silencing a board member who could not stay longer for whatever reason. Has kept near, but they're also the one who is diametrically opposed to the action that's about to be taken.
Right.
So I think a unanimous vote. And I don't believe I've ever remembered a time when we did not unanimous vote to continue.
Well, and if you have to stop, it just. means you have to set the- going. It's not like
Exactly.
you Stop the vote from happening, you just delay. it.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think unanimous is the best way to move forward.
Okay, it seems to be working for us.
We'll make those changes. Anything else?
I
jumping out
had
here?
some items in the previous one that forgot were there. We could finish this.
Yeah, why don't we finish this one? I said one, there was one point here where provided the board typically has 7 members.
Yeah.
And there are no more than 2 vacancies. I'm not quite clear how that fits in.
I'm not either. Cindy, can you speak to that? And would it be possible that they can elect to strike that entire paragraph?
Which paragraph? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Under quorum and abstentions, it's paragraph 3. It's all in red.
But it was hard to tell if it's an example or if it just should say 5 members in our case.
I think it's a function of a 7-member board because if you have a 7-member board and you have 2 vacancies, then a majority of a 7-member board would be 4 members. So you would need a 4-to-1 vote. So let me check what the CSBA sample says about
And the
this
question
one.
would be, do you need to translate it to 5,
Right.
3, so you need 2 votes, or do you need 3 votes? Yeah, so it just, is it important to include, and if it is, it should reflect our situation, not the 7 members.
Yes, let me see if I can figure that out as we are looking at it here.
Anything else you wanted to bring up while she's checking, or we can take that offline and bring it back to you once we have the answer?
The other one that was surprising to see was the 20-minute limit per item.
Right.
Which we've never had or followed.
Right.
What's that?
I've seen that before.
I've seen it in other places, but it hasn't been here in terms of following it.
No, we haven't been involved.
The concern that I've always had with putting any kind of time limit on a particular agenda item is if you have a number of people who want to speak on it, it would force you to limit how much time someone has. And if it is an active item, then people come with their expectation, have written out we see a lot of people who've written out 3 minutes worth of talk, and we're telling them they can only speak for 1 minute. And on occasion, we have to do that. I don't think we've ever brought it down more than 2 minutes, but even there, it limits people's opportunity. I'd rather see us have to extend meetings rather than cut people's comments.
Well, I think in our right, was it governance, our other handbook, we actually addressed that where we don't want to limit the number of people or prioritize whoever, but we do a little bit by moving the after 20 minutes to end of
that's on the non-agendized items in our governance.
Right.
So if there's more than, if a bunch of people want to
Agendized.
speak on non-agendized, then we would move them to the end of the meeting. I think that was appropriate. But in terms of any particular action item,
Yeah.
we want to give people the opportunity to speak. And on occasion, if we do have too many speaker cards, that's when we cut them down to like 2 minutes.
So the current language is the board shall limit the total time for public input on each item to 20 minutes. CSBA is recommending the board will limit. We can either strike that entire sentence, or a suggestion might be the board can limit. So just to allow or may limit.
And 20, I mean, I attended the LA County Board meeting. I was surprised that all of their items are 30 and that's wow, but 20 is even less than that. They're bigger. No, but I mean, they're bigger and they have all day meetings and stuff and they allow 30. So that's why I'm thinking 20 seems short. I'm just so surprised this is here and that we never noticed it before. And we've had discussions around this whole topic several times.
So are you?
But I think
comfortable?
making it can,
Yeah.
then it keeps it
Then
open-ended,
open,
that if for some reason you need it to, could.
Well, and I would just kind of throw out the idea of maybe moving it to 30, because 20 isn't really, doesn't align with 3-minute comments.
Yeah.
Whereas
that's-
30 aligns with 10 comments, and 10 and 30 feel like an acceptable number. Whereas 20 feels, just intuitively feels a little more limiting. I mean, I know that's just kind of how I feel and
Yeah.
not.
So
Actual
change it to
fact.
can and increase it to 30.
The other thing here is that the paragraph just below that, in order to ensure that non-English speakers, and we face a situation, I don't think people necessarily right away, but someone with any kind of speech impediment as well, but that might require additional time. We need to be a little flexible.
Maybe more than just about second language.
The other thing that was interesting to me on this number 3, without taking action, board members or district staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed by the public about items not appearing on the agenda. We've been pretty strict about not making any kind of comments.
And I think the only time we might is when the president believes that there could be a disconnect. And sometimes the president says, Superintendent, did you want to clarify something? But it's only, I've always directed staff to not speak unless asked to. So I think that adding a sentence there that allows that particular strategy to be used periodically. I don't think it should be regularly, or we get into a back and forth that's not healthy. But I do think that if we did it periodically on the direction of the president, that is language I'd like to see us include.
I think that's helpful too, because a lot of times someone says something and then there's crickets, and trying to have at least an appropriate response. Generally the appropriate response is that someone from staff will even point out who on staff will get back to that person. But there may be times where a quick clarification from staff, as opposed to board members getting into a discussion on the topic, I think is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the difference, right? It's like we want to create transparency and understanding, but because it's a non-agendized item, we cannot do business around. And so it's, looking at it through that lens of, if there's a misunderstanding or something that needs to be clarified just from a, fact base, as opposed to, having a conversation around what we think about it.
So for that reason, I would suggest we end it after ask a question for clarification, because the make a brief announcement or a brief report about their own activities sounds like what we cover in board reports. It doesn't sound like it'd be appropriate there. I mean, you might say clarification or comment, because I could see someone saying, your question will be answered if you come to advocacy day on blah, blah, blah. But I mean, that kind of thing, but the report part, I think is.
I think that's important too, because one of the things that we faced in the past was during board member reports, We had one board member who would use that as an opportunity to respond back to things that were happening, being centered on agendas, and that's not the intent.
And
I think we've
this,
covered that in our governments, in our governance.
Okay,
So in that paragraph, board members should be singular and staff members should be singular.
thank you.
or take out the A.
Yep.
Just be
either way.
consistent.
Yes, that was true too. Okay, anything else on that one?
Just to clarify on that red language under quorum and abstentions, that is applicable only to 7-member boards. So that paragraph can be stricken.
Okay,
Thank you, Sandy.
thank you. All right. you want
Rachel, did you want to step? back?
Yeah, I had some back, it's under the previous one, agenda dissemination to the board, so it's on page 40s where it
Yeah.
starts.
Page 4.
It says each board member shall be, it's referring to the copy. I think given that we don't get copies anymore, we get a link to the agenda and we should say that. And then it talks about what's in the packet, including minutes to be approved. And then I would recommend we just say all supporting documents pertinent to action items and take out the copy of communications and all that. And, you know, if you provide us a report to hard copy of report, great, but it's the backup to the action items that's always there. And then in paragraph 2, there was when special meetings are called, the superintendent or designee shall, it says receive. I think it means should be provide at least 24 hours prior to the meeting notice of the business.
I think that might be the language of the statute, but let me double check while you're talking about that.
Because it looks like it's the information going out, not information coming.
But I think it's probably referring to the Brown Act requirement that for a special meeting, the agenda and materials, as opposed to 72 hours prior, must be received 24 hours. So that like the agenda and the materials have to be posted 24 hours prior to a special meeting.
So, but it's not the superintendent or designee that receives it. It's
Oh, I see. I see.
they provide it or the public receives it, either way.
I see what you're saying. Okay, let me just double check the statute to make sure that the statute doesn't say that as well. It says the notice shall be delivered personally or by any other means and shall be received at least 24 hours before the time of the meeting is specified in the notice. So I think the receipt is for the board members and the member of the public. So I think maybe the change needs
Wrong
to
stuff
be,
got crossed out, right? Superintendent or designee probably was supposed to be, when special meetings are called, the agenda and supporting materials shall be received or something.
By board
It's
members.
just the right people with the receiving is.
Okay.
correct.
We'll get that cleaned up.
And it was related to the consent stuff,
I
so
have a
that's on
question
39.
about that too.
Okay, so Page 39. Talks about how items, let's see, I wrote stuff and then I like what's right there. They bundle a number of, I would consider adding action items and act upon them in a single vote through the use of a consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda shall be of a routine nature. So it's just kind of tightening it up. So that's pretty small. And then I wondered about the thing that we talked about in terms of members of the public requesting items to be removed, but it's actually up to the board to decide if items are removed. That part wasn't in there. We talked
Was
about
my
including
question
it.
too.
And sorry about that. That was, I think, an oversight on our part because we have worked with F3 to get language that basically communicates the concept that you just said, Rachel, which is somebody comes forward to say, I want this item removed. They give you a brief reason why they wish it removed, and then you actually agree that it should be removed. Is language, Cindy Smith, that's missing from our bylaws. We've been told that that's like expected practice, and so how about if we bring that language to you that captures that concept when we bring it back?
And is our idea that they would put on the card why they want it removed? The president, as they're doing the stuff they normally do with consent items, would say, so and so is asked,
We'll be sure that
you'll work.
the
that.
language includes some procedural pieces so that it's smooth. I don't want to jump ahead because I don't have the expertise.
Or maybe
there.
it's in the other document.
Yeah, but
the
we'll,
how.
we'll be sure that regardless, we'll bring the language that captures that sentiment. And that if any other details need to be there that helps with making it procedurally easy, that it comes back the next time. Well, when it comes back when it's supposed to be approved, not here.
So that concludes those. Was there any other bylaws that you identified? Now, what we
I just wanted to have a quick conversation around the board self-evaluation and that bylaw. And I don't know if that's something that I feel like we evaluate things throughout the year, but you know, do we have, and this may be a governance, not a bylaw thing, but do we have, do we want to talk about a practice? You know, now we have these wonderful strategic directions. We review those. Do we also want to talk about just as a board annually, or whatever that looks like in terms of what our goals are as a governing body for the year? You know, our vision, those types of things. I just wanted to kind of put that out there to see if that was something that.
What we could, as a staff, provide to you is, I actually have always experienced in previous districts, a very clear process around how a board self-evaluates. There are great models out there. We can work with our F3 colleagues and bring to a governance workshop. Because we're going to be planning a number of governance workshops into the new board season, because we'll have a new board member that we offer for you to consider some ways that you can do that. I would prefer to be a little bit more prepared, and I don't necessarily see it as needing to be explicitly stated in a bylaw, but if you're interested, we could bring you something through the workshops for discussion.
I mean, that's kind of why I'm bringing it forth, is I think it would be healthy and good for the board to look to evaluate how the previous year has been, how, you know, what's sustainable, what can shift, and then what our visions are in the future, and that kind of thing. I don't know if there's been that practice in the past, but.
not directly, but as you bring it up, I think it's actually something worthwhile to consider a workshop prior to the LCAP meeting. So that if there are priorities that have come up
Yeah.
through board discussion, that they be incorporated into discussions for any changes to the LCAP as well.
And my own past practice with it is, your regular work is to ensure that you're prioritizing, overseeing, providing feedback, giving direction. And so, yes, there are certain times in the year when giving us clear direction helps other work that's happening. And I've seen it work where the governing body actually assesses yourselves as the governing body, not individually, because you are actually, as you know, your authority rests in the body. And there are ways for you to actually think about how you have operated as a body, how you have been able to oversee and provide direction. And if you as a body want to give each other some insights, again, not personally, but collectively, on how you might do that better or how you might sustain what already is, that's what I've seen the conversation take aboard too. But we can talk more about that with the right materials.
Yeah, and I think just that opportunity as a governing body to kind of look at the bird's eye view of what we've done, because I find that, you know, we do a lot of the work monthly and in these workshops, but it's not so much putting out the fires, but it's definitely focusing on what's in the moment. And so then, and I think as we've seen in these last 2 years, and the gaps that we've seen and that we're starting to fill, and I think moving forward annually to kind of look and see where those holes are popping up and be proactive with it rather than waiting until it becomes an issue and dealing with it then. So.
I had one more item related to that last bylaw or the second to last bylaw that I didn't get to bring up, and that was related to the dissemination of the board materials to the public. there's a new addition in there related to posting the documents electronically. And since that's the norm and the copying and is the exception, can we move the electronic one first? And Cindy, do you still have like a list of people who have requested for the year? And so, I mean, I think putting that first and then you having to make copies and mailing them to people should really be the exception for the people who can't do the electronic. And then there's even a provision for that they pay for the cost of it. So,
Yes, and I do have a list and it all is electronic and we have made a copy in yours.
okay. So I just think the order should be.
Anything else on this topic? But in that case, moving on to item 5.0, we do have.
Excuse me,
a-
Ken.
Oh,
We did want to, Cindy
go ahead.
Smith was going to speak to the new laws that are taking place in January, just to give you a quick, brief update on what those mean to us.
Thank you.
So I'll start with the slightly simpler one, which is SB 1100 regarding disruption. So you may have noticed within the meeting conduct board bylaw, there's already some language in there about disruptions, and that typically addresses disruptions sort of globally within the meeting, clearing the room. This new provision, which was added to the Brown Act, allows the presiding member or the board president to warn an individual when their behavior is disrupting the meeting. And if the person fails to stop the disrupting behavior, then the presiding officer designee may remove that individual from the meeting. There is some language regarding what disrupting means, which includes engaging in behavior during the meeting that actually disrupts, disturbs, impedes, or renders infeasible the orderly conduct of the meeting, including but not limiting to failing to comply with reasonable and lawfully adopted meeting conduct regulations, or engaging in behavior that constitutes either use of force or a true threat of force. So this allows the ability to remove somebody specifically who is being disruptive from a meeting. We do have, just acknowledging that the public does have a right to participate in a meeting and to even offer, critical type of information, to, criticize the district for certain things. So we just want to point out this is something that should be looked at carefully as far as, whether it actually is a disruption going on. If there's, the concern with trying to prevent somebody from attending a public meeting. So those two interests are sort of competing here with this new language, this new requirement.
Just one question on that in terms of enforcement. Do we really have any enforceable action other than recessing the meeting?
Well, this allows the person to be removed. So how that happens is something that the district would need to give some thought to. If districts, I work with one district who has a police department, so they have police officers that can be present at the meeting. So if there's a situation like that, that would be who might be the entity that would be in charge of actually removing that person. But in a district where you don't have a police force, you don't have that kind of presence, then some thought needs to be given about that and how this might be implemented as part of the discussion as to whether the district wants to implement this as part of its policy.
Sure. Thank you.
And separate but connected, we're also examining policies that a number of districts have created, and they're calling it, for lack of a better term, a civility policy. So we are actually exploring that, learning from other districts who have implemented it. It's connected to this because we would never really want to get to this place. But if we actually had some agreed upon norms, whether it's in a boardroom or in other places across our district, that could also be something that you consider. But we're still in the beginning stages of sorting all that out.
Yeah, unfortunately, we also have to consider, and we've had some conversation about safety practices during our meetings as well, for board members and the public.
I think this one, we just wanted to bring this to your attention. I think it's already reported. Right now, staff is not suggesting a change in practice, except to say, we are thinking about how to propose some ideas for your consideration. And if we were needing to implement what the law allows. That's the first part. The second part is a little bit more complicated. So I'll turn it back over to Cindy Smith.
Yes, AB 2449 deals with teleconferencing into board meetings. So you may recall with the pandemic, AB 361 came into play, which allows districts to hold meetings via remote means under specific circumstances surrounding states of emergency. And just to clarify, that bill was not only intended to address COVID-19, but other situations some districts find themselves in if, for example, there's a fire in their community or some other emergency situation that makes pulling together for a meeting in person difficult. So we still have those provisions through and up until January 1, 2024. So the implementation of that law got a lot of talk going about teleconference meetings and this balance between Brown Act and having meetings in public, in person at one location. Also recognizing that teleconference is something that that may benefit some districts, some individuals as far as increasing participation in public meetings. So what 2449 allows is individual board members can request to participate in a local agency meeting or a school district meeting remotely based on the board member's own emergency circumstances or for other identified just cause. So those two things are identified within the bill. Emergency circumstances is defined as a physical or a family medical emergency that prevents a member from attending in person. Just cause, there's a number of things. In interest of time, I won't go into all of them, but I do note that while travel while on official business is one of them, it doesn't include vacation. I know sometimes vacations come into play a lot with, conflicting with board meetings and wanting to appear via teleconference. So what has to be in place, though, are a number of things in order for this to happen. The bill requires that the district has to have basically access to its meetings via remote means at all times. And the reason why that is because the timing of this is while the bill says that the board member wants to request this, needs to do it as soon as they can. If it happens on the day of the meeting that an emergency situation comes up and they can request that they attend remotely, that action by the board doesn't need to be agendized in that situation. It can actually be taken at the beginning of the meeting. But again, there's these things that the district has to have in place in order for that to be able to occur. And one of them is a pretty basic one, which is that a quorum of the members participating are in person in a location that is within the agency's jurisdiction. So I don't think that's too controversial. But the other piece is that the local agency has to provide means by which the public may remotely hear and visually observe the meeting via one or more of the following methods. So either a two-way audiovisual platform like Zoom or a two-way telephonic service and a live webcasting of the meeting. So those have to be in place for the meetings pretty much all the time in order for this this teleconferencing option to be available for board meetings. In addition to that, the district would need to provide for an opportunity for people to attend and address the board through all of the following: a call-in option, an internet-based service option, and in-person attendance. So I believe what the law is sort of getting at is we'll allow your board members to have this option, but you basically have to open up the teleconference of the meeting to the public as a whole to allow this to happen. There are some procedural things the board member has to do that I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to, and there's some limitations as far as the number of times a board member can use this option. If you want me to go into those, I can, but suffice it to say that I think the question for the board is whether it would want to have this option, and if so, set up the procedures that would allow this to occur.
And if I can just add, in summary, right now, you do not give yourselves that option. And though we do make our meetings available through Zoom, we do not open up the function of public comment, for example, through it, and that is permitted. If you want to give yourselves that option, then we need to do a considerable number of things to also open, in essence, options for our public as well. So it's kind of like two choices: stay the same, because we're frankly within the law now, or change, but it means that we have to make some other changes as well. And so we just wanted to, and Cindy Smith explained what those changes are. So we wanted you to have that information. It's not as though, obviously this isn't a decision-making meeting. So we don't have to do anything with it today, except be sure you understand the information. And then we'll have to decide if there is to be a change. We would need to get moving sooner than later, because January 1st, Cindy Smith, is that the date? Which is fast approaching.
So clarifying question. Which the courtesy or the service you provide for the board member, you need to provide for the public. Can you get it all set up, but then you only need to provide it to the public when you provide it for a board member, which might be occasionally, or does it mean all the time it has to be that way?
I'm going to look to Cindy Smith, because I think there's operational issues attached to this. If somebody has to leave town within 2 days, how we would let people know. So it's my understanding that if you're opening the option for board members, then you're always opening the option for the public. That was my understanding, but I'm new to this. So Cindy Smith?
That's correct, because it's not just like if a board member decides on the day of the meeting that, oh, emergency situation, I need to attend via teleconference. If you haven't agendized the teleconference option, then you can't, it needs to be agendized at the time of the meeting. So at least within 72 hours prior to the meeting. I think the only instance where you could maybe do it on a case-by-case basis is if somebody knows that they're going to have an instance ahead of the meeting, such that you would be able to agendize the action to approve it and to agendize the access to the public via Zoom. But if it's an emergency that comes up after that 72 hours of the agenda being posted, then you're in trouble because you haven't agendized the teleconference option.
And I think the other thing operationally is how we communicate to our community that, oh, this is a meeting that you can actually do it via Zoom, and this is a meeting you can't. I think that as I've been listening to other superintendents thinking about this as well, it's a question of, making a statement that this is an option for board members, emergency, or even if you have notice, which means we provide this option for our public, or like our present practice, this is not an option for board members. There are times, very occasionally, when someone hasn't been able to be here, and then it's not an option for our public. It's just deciding kind of which lane you want to be in, and then continuing in that lane.
Yeah, it's
so
on
that
all the timeline.
so that everybody knows how we operate. Because if it was kind of dependent upon if one of you was gone, it would be almost impossible, in my experience, to communicate to the public that you can do it this way now.
Right.
Yeah. And then I would ask too, like in the scenario that we're in now, where Cindy Smith is teleconferencing in, that's still, given our current practice, that's still acceptable under the law? Or in order for us to have someone teleconference in to the meeting, then we have to have everyone
So
or allow everyone?
Cindy, sometimes when it comes to a legal counsel or another expert who is only needed for 15 minutes and to travel might be 4 or 5 hours, we do what we're doing with you right now. How does that impact what we're talking about?
It doesn't, because the key is about the board member attendance. So really what this is getting at is the other teleconference option, the one that's always been in the Brown Act, is still there. And that teleconference option says a board member can attend via remote means at another location. You just have to agendize that location, and you have to allow the public to appear at that location. So in an emergency situation, or a situation where somebody is ill, you may be attending a meeting from your home. You don't want to agendize your home location, and you don't want to have to admit members of the public to attend the meeting at your home. So that is existing Brown Act, that still applies. What this law allows you to do is to not have to agendize the location where that person, the board member in particular, is attending from, and to allow the public to access. That's why you have these other requirements about the public accessing via remote means as well. So the key issue here is board member attendance, not guests or other people who may be providing input to the board.
And we've done that for closed session, not for open session. The one question that I would have tied to this is emergency situations where, and hopefully we never have to use this, where we cannot get a majority of board members together because of the emergency, but actions are needed from a board governance perspective. The city has a provision of standby officers that would only be used in the event that there's such a disaster that they could not get a governing board together and they have alternates who can participate. I don't know that there's anything like that in terms of provision for school boards, but I'm just wondering if there needs to be.
So
Anything like that?
I think if you've got a state of emergency declared, then you're under the AB 361 provisions, the ones that I mentioned before that came into play with the pandemic. So if you've got a declared state of emergency, and I'm trying to remember what other factors come into play with that, there is that recognition that in states of emergency, there is a need to pull together a meeting via teleconference because the state of emergency is impacting the members' ability to come to the meeting in person. So let me see. It's
Or
when it
even
is
hold the meeting safely in the building, right? I mean, it could be in the state of emergency. It isn't even advised for people to
Yeah.
come here.
But also would speak to the authority that the board gives the superintendent for making certain decisions. With the board acting retroactively, for instance.
Then it seems like it would almost become a special meeting where the meeting is about the emergency and all the other business can wait, right?
That was what I was gonna clarify, Cindy Smith. When we must call a special board meeting and follow all the rules for special board meeting, and that would be what I think, Ken, you're speaking about. How do the rules around special board meeting impact this conversation of an overarching direction going forward? Like, can we still call special board meetings and not worry about these additional aspects that are in play on January 1st, or do they impact special board meetings as well?
so long as the AB 361 provisions are in place, and those will be in place until January 1, 2024. So basically a little over a year. Those provisions allow the board to pull together for a special meeting for the purpose of determining that there is a state of emergency and to make the decision to hold the meetings via remote means because of that state of emergency. So that's in existing law now, at least until January 1, 2024. I'm not sure what's going to happen if there's going to be more legislation to extend that bill. The bill AB 2449 doesn't address the global emergency situation. So there may be some more legislative information coming out in the
So
coming
what
year.
I'm hearing you say is that until 2024.
Yeah.
Ken's concern is covered.
That's my
We
understanding.
need
Yeah,
more legislation or more direction post 2024, January 1, to figure out if we need to do something differently. Okay.
correct.
Anything else?
You get the direction.
Yeah, so at this point, if we are continuing with our present approach, then we don't have any additional work to do. If you are wishing for the different approach, then we have some work to do. So I think at this point, I mean, it's not like, so I don't. Why don't we think about it? And then let's think about how we actually go in one direction or another and propose that through the proper channels. Because again, this is not a decision-making meeting. So we wanted you to be aware of it, and then we're going to figure out what the next step is to how to decide if you want A, which is we're keeping things the same, or B, we're going to actually give you that opportunity to be remote, and then we change how we do things with the public. So how about if we bring that back? Is that,
Well, yeah, and I think it also relates to whether it has to do with board members or not. There are some members of the public who've been requesting that we do have more of a hybrid meeting all the time, and at least with the time when we decided not to continue that, it was the efficiency of the board meeting, but I mean, kind of need to think about that too. And some of the candidates for the open seat, that's part of their platform, so we're probably gonna have to revisit that concept anyway.
right? So why don't we just think about that? And then it has, any decision has to happen at a board meeting. So it's not gonna happen here.
Cindy Smith, anything else that you wanted to add? At this
Just quick note that, and I think Cindy Fisher mentioned this earlier, is that we do not have CSBA sample language for either one of these bills, language to implement either one of these bills as of yet. They go into effect January 1, 2024. So that might also come into play when we are able to see that language.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
John, we could make that choice down the road. It's just the door opens.
So we can leave it to say, we have a present practice that aligns with all the legislation. Means that you will be at meetings. So we can leave it to, if the board wants to change that direction, the board can direct us to change that direction. How about if we just keep it that clean? We have an existing process under all legislation, and it's up to the board to say to me, we'd like you, superintendent, to bring back to us information on how to implement X. So present practice until board decides otherwise.
Haven't received that at this point?
Yes, it took me a while to come to that.
Okay, so with that said, we do have a speaker card for today's workshop. And the conversation is only regarding the items that were on the workshop. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, it's really not reasonable for me to wrap up everything that you have discussed in 150 minutes in 3 minutes. You should have given me the opportunity to address you after each agenda item. Under resolutions, I object to your resolution about election. 16 and 17-year-olds are too politically immature to know how to register and their political affiliation. By forcing them to register, I think you're harvesting potential voters for Democrats. Why Democrats? Because teachers union vote Democrat. So as a parent, I object that you are forcing my children to pre-register when they are way too young. In addition, California election doesn't require voter ID. So when they pre-register, mail-in ballots will be activated to be sent to address that they may not be there when they turn 18. So you're doing something that really isn't benefiting them, but benefiting you. Under Words Matter resolution, it is an attack on freedom of speech. Different words have different meaning to different people. And we are a mutual, we are a multicultural diversity community, such as some people call me mama. I don't like to be called mama. To me, that means I'm a mother, but they mean it as like I am an endearment to them when I don't know them. So it's unwise for you to use a resolution to force children, everyone to act a certain way that please you. You are being a communist that way. Regarding 4.2 bylaws, if you allow council to join your workshop remotely, you should make it available for the public as well. Like today, nobody is able to join remotely, but the council. Regarding election, Trustee Wong Ordway is still currently serving as an appointment. She's never been elected. So going forward, I would like you to please make sure all appointments end at the term. She got away with it because of the district election. And I really call that unfair. She's been serving for more than 3 years as an appointee, not an elected official. Furthermore, trustees should not conduct board business over social media platforms, in my opinion. You are not really socializing on my tax dollars and also doing business that affect my children's life. I would respectfully ask you guys to please conduct business using district provided emails addresses only. Furthermore, PTSA parents are privileged community social members. They should not have the power to appoint student representatives. That is not how American government works. It has to stop. SB 1100.
Thank you for your comments. Can you just wrap up, please?
Thank you. I appreciate that. SB 1100 regarding disruption. What are defined as disruption must be clarified. Last time there was a Black audience who stormed me, but I was the one who was reprimanded by you. If you are going to hire a police officer to remove speakers, you must disclose that to the speakers, and you need to let us know what is disruption to you.
Very good.
Applause.
Thank you
Hold
for
on.
your
Just
comments.
Two more words. Applause and cheers should not be considered as disruption. Thank you.
Okay, and for the record, your name today for the record?
Thank you very much. My name today is Taiwan Secountry. Thank you.
And